Good afternoon. I want to welcome everybody to this hearing of the Subcommittee on Strategic Forces and our hearing on the 2019 budget request for national security space programs. Unfortunately, as everybody in the room now knows, we were interrupted by votes and we're an hour behind starting off. So for the sake of not keeping y'all here all night, I'm going to submit my opening statement for the record, and the ranking member has told me that he's going to submit his opening statement for the record too. So we'll go straight to your opening statements, and I would ask that each of you have 5 minutes. Your entire statement will be accepted into the record, so if you just summarize it, we'll get to questions and answers and finish this session and go to the classified section immediately after that. So with that, thank you all for being here. I know it takes a lot of time and energy to prepare for these things, but it really helps us. We really need to hear your thoughts at this time of the year. So with that, I'll recognize General Raymond. Well, first let me recognize we have General Raymond with us today, Betty Sapp from NRO, and Honorable Rapuano. How do you pronounce that?
Rapuano.
Rapuano. Well, we'll start with General Raymond for your opening statement. You're recognized.
Thank you. Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, distinguished members of the subcommittee, I'm honored to appear before this committee. And this time, it's my first time being able to testify in front of you in my dual hat as the Air Force Space Command Commander and as the Joint Forces Space Component Commander, a component of U.S. Strategic Command. I have the absolute distinct privilege of leading and representing both the Air Force and Joint Space personnel who underpin successful global operations for our joint force and our nation. As I have stated previously, I am increasingly convinced that we are at a strategic inflection point and that we must accelerate our preparations to protect and defend against a conflict that begins in or extends to space. And that's exactly what we're doing. Today's space capabilities are the foundation of power projection and fuel our joint force lethality. A high-end conflict may begin in our domain, which will require us to fight for space superiority. As a component of United States Strategic Command, I would be remiss if I didn't echo the words of my boss, General Hyten, to say that our force is fully prepared to deter and, if necessary, to respond and win if deterrence were to fail. As our national security strategy states, the United States considers unfettered access to and freedom to operate in space to be of vital interest. Our national defense strategy clearly articulates that the central challenge to the United States' prosperity and security is the reemergence of long-term strategic competition. Space is a warfighting domain, just like air, land, and sea. This budget is aligned with the National Defense Strategy to meet our warfighting imperatives necessary to compete, deter, and win. This budget marks a bold shift towards an increased focus on space superiority in a contested environment. Specifically, we are enhancing our space situational awareness and our ability to command and control. We are shifting towards more defendable architectures. We are investing in test and training infrastructure to further enhance our readiness. And finally, we are enhancing our partnerships with the intelligence community, our allied partners, and the commercial space industry. I thank you for your support, and I look forward to working with Congress as we continue to focus on our national security space posture. I am privileged, absolutely privileged, to be here with my distinguished colleagues on the panel this afternoon, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, General. Chair now recognizes Betty Sapp, Director of the National Reconnaissance Office.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, and distinguished members of the committee. Sure. It's a great pleasure to host you and your committee, your members out at the NRO, and it's a great honor for me to be here today. The NRO has a very clear and a very critical mission for the nation. We provide the space-based ISR capabilities necessary to assure the U.S. an information and operational advantage. The NRO is structured for success. We are small and streamlined with end-to-end mission responsibility. We've enjoyed success in all aspects of that end-to-end mission. Our research and development team has developed and matured the next generation technology necessary to stay ahead of changing targets and threats, fill current mission gaps, and develop new partnerships. Our acquisition teams are delivering the capabilities our users need on time and within budget. In 2017, for the 9th consecutive year, we achieved a clean, independent audit opinion. demonstrating our ability to properly manage and account for the resources entrusted to us. We had 4 successful launches last year, including our first on a SpaceX Falcon 9. Finally, and most importantly, we continued to deliver critical operational capabilities with a better than 99.7% reliability. Our fiscal year 2019 budget request will build on the successful history of delivering innovative overhead intelligence systems for national security with the resilience required for the threat environment we face. We're specifically focused on investments that will deliver and assure the space-based capabilities we'll need in a future fight. More resilience, more capability and capacity, and more speed. Greater resilience continues to be a top priority. Processes and Conops to protect our current on-orbit systems are being refined and tested, and our people are being trained to use them to full advantage. New systems will have resiliency features built in as an inherent part of the design. In a future conflict, resilient space must backstop and work in concert with resilient air assets. Our investments focus on achieving the capacity and the capabilities required by the IC and the DoD. We are increasing persistence and the look rate from space, reducing the gaps currently exploited by our adversaries. Finally, we require more capacity and capabilities in space. They must be combined to deliver that critical information directly to warfighters, at the tactical edge and in the fight, and it must be delivered when they need it. Enabled by advances in artificial intelligence, automatic target recognition, machine learning, and emerging technology, the NRO plans to do exactly that. Everyone at the NRO is focused on our mission, delivering innovative overhead intelligence systems for national security. The current and projected threat environment doesn't change our mission, it just makes it more challenging. The men and women of the NRO are more than up to that challenge. Thank you for your support, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. Chair now recognizes Kenneth Rapuano, Assistant Secretary of Defense for Homeland Defense and Global Security. You're recognized for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Rogers, Ranking Member Cooper, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. It's an honor to appear before you today along with General J. Raymond, Commander of Air Force Space Command, and the U.S. Strategic Command Joint Force Space Component Commander, and Ms. Betty Sapp, Director of the National Reconnaissance Office. Space is a warfighting domain, and just as in air, land, and sea, and cyberspace, the Department of Defense must be prepared to address any and all threats to our national security. Space systems provide our joint force an unmatched ability to project power globally, respond to crises rapidly, strike swiftly and precisely, and command forces in multiple theaters of operation simultaneously. Our national security strategy and the national defense strategy prominently recognize the criticality of space and acknowledge the potential for conflict to extend into space. Our new national defense strategy charts the course for how DoD will contribute to each of the national security strategy's 4 national interests. Under the new NDS, long-term strategic competition with China and Russia are the principal priorities for the department. Addressing the challenges posed to our preeminence as a space power is fundamental to that effort. Today's potential adversaries and competitors have studied how the U.S. Joint Force operates, and they are rapidly developing capabilities designed to challenge our freedom of action across all domains. Those potential adversaries view space as an area where they could weaken our advantage and cause cascading impacts on our sea, air, land, and cyber systems that rely on our space-based capabilities. Denial of U.S. space advantage is a key component of their strategy. With this budget, the Department is making critical investments and capabilities necessary to protect and defend the space domain to ensure the mission to compete, deter, and win in the face of growing challenges. The FY19 budget request prioritizes activities to address the space threat and improves on the performance of our space systems. Our aim remains to deliver the space effects to enable the combat edge our nation and our warfighters must have. We also recognize the important need for the Department to be organized and structured most effectively to deliver on our duty to protect the nation and its vital interests. The Department must accelerate and is accelerating its response to the changing dynamics of space. The Deputy Secretary of Defense has heard Congress's concerns and, consistent with the NDAA for FY 2018, has already taken action through interim implementation guidance and looks forward to completing the directed studies and changes that may be required. The Department's partnership with Congress is and will remain absolutely critical to our success. To that end, I remain grateful for this subcommittee's strong support and interest in this vital area and its advocacy to dissuade aggression and establish a lethal force with the unmatched ability to prevail in, from, and through the ultimate high ground of space. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
I thank you. And now I'll recognize myself for questions. General Raymond, the space launch industry is innovating in some pretty incredible ways that could increase capability and reduce costs, like moving toward reusable launch vehicles. Given all of this, how does this Air Force plan to integrate reusability into its launch program, and does the LSA contemplate reusability?
Thank you, Congressman Rogers. I have gone on record in the past saying I fully support reusability. In my opinion, we would be stupid not to go down that path. It saves us money, and it will make sure that we do it smartly and that we'll be able to launch effectively, but we fully intend to capitalize on the advantages that the U.S. industry has with reusability.
Great. Mr. Rapuano, given President Trump's recent endorsement of the establishment of an independent Space Force, how do you think the Department should implement that direction? Because it is consistent with what this committee and the House of Representatives has called for in the build-up to this last NDA.
Congressman, the President is very focused on outcomes. He has prioritized space. He has recognized the threats that have evolved and the pace at which they've evolved, and he recognizes it as a warfighting domain. He also is very interested in ensuring that the department is best organized and equipped to achieve our vital missions in space, and he's very interested in exploring any options that can provide that enhanced capabilities. The Deputy Secretary, as you know, is leading the organizational and management review for the department consistent with the NDAA. Assessment of the Space Corps is one of those options that is getting close attention among others. And he is going to be recommending that set of options that best ensures lasting U.S. leadership and success in space by 1 August per the requirement.
Well, I agree the President cares about outcomes, but I would ask you to go back and look at his exact words, and they were, we should have a Space Force, we will have a Space Force. So you're right, though. Deputy Secretary Shanahan is charged with trying to design that. I just was hoping you could show us a little bit of what it might look like before he does it, but apparently that's not going to happen. With that, General Raymond, yesterday in the full committee, we had some testimony about how if the Air Force really wanted to while we are between where we are now and the establishment of this new Space Force or Space Corps or whatever it's going to be, which will not be in the immediate future, the Air Force has a lot of challenges in dealing with national security space and some of the threats that we face. It was proposed yesterday in the hearing that if the Air Force really wanted to demonstrate that they get it and they're going to get after this, they would raise the profile of space in the department and put a significantly larger amount of money against that challenge. And I don't expect you to have the number today, but I would ask you to, at your earliest convenience, to, after you think about this for a while, kind of get back to me and let me know what you think that number might be to enable you to have all the resources you need to get after the challenge fast.
I'll be happy to do that. I will tell you, I think the profile of space is pretty high in the Air Force. It's very high in the Air Force. This budget this year represents across the FYDP an 18% increase, about a $7 billion increase across the FYDP, but I'll be happy to put some thought on that. I've been focused on this budget. I'll be happy to put some thought on that and come back to you.
Thank you very much, General. And the Chair will now recognize my friend and colleague from Tennessee, Jim Cooper, for any questions he may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I welcome the stronger Air Force budget, but I will defer questions for the closed session in view of the lateness of the hour and the excellent attendance by my Democratic colleagues. Thanks.
The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Lamborn, for any questions he may have.
Thank you, and I will have some questions for the closed hearing, but I've got a couple for right now. and appreciate the conversations we've had recently.
The fact that I wouldn't pay attention.
The $350 million in unfunded priorities. Now, as you told me earlier, there is a $7 billion increase. However, we have to draw the line somewhere when we're doing budgets. But if you could have that extra $350 million, what would we be able to get for that? And what are we losing by not having that?
Congressman, thanks for the question. The unfunded, the way the Air Force did the unfunded priority list was obviously it's in its name, priority. So we have prioritized those activities that we couldn't fit into the budget. Although $7 billion is a significant increase for space and has really as I mentioned in my opening comments, a bold shift towards warfighting and being able to protect and defend those assets in a contested domain. But I'll be happy to come back to you and talk specifically about the items that are in the unfunded priority list, but they give Congress options in a priority order to help accelerate some of the things that we already have in the program.
Okay, well, we can continue that discussion. I would also like to ask you about the increased need for warfighting, space warfighting training. Now that everyone's recognized that space is contested and it is a warfighting domain, we need to have the personnel who have the training necessary to excel in that domain. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a key focus area for us. I've been focused on that since the day I took command, the professional development and training. We've made some pretty significant strides towards that end. We've implemented the Space Mission Force, which has allowed us to enhance the advanced training of our crews. We have implemented what we call space flags, analogous to red flags, to increase the focus of that as well. And what I would suggest to you, it's not just about space training. It's about multi-domain training. And really what I'm focusing on is making sure that we have space operators that are very smart in joint warfighting and that we have joint warfighters that are also very smart in space, because it's that multi-domain strength, collaboration and strength that's going to carry us to where we need to be in the future. We also, in this budget, spent about approximately $175 million to get after additional trainers, exercises, and war games. Thank you.
That's really good to see. And lastly, for any one of you, can we do a better job of partnering with the commercial sector, with private industry, to accomplish our goals? And if so, how?
I don't want to monopolize this here now. I'll deflect, but I am passionate about this as well. We are working very closely with our commercial customers, and I think this will provide us significant advantage going forward. One of the things that we've done in this budget, the Enterprise Space Battle Management Command and Control Program, is focused on building open standards and a consortium approach to energize and harness all of industry, focusing on these issues. And it's a key priority for us going forward, and you'll see that reflected in our budget.
That's great. And either one of you.
You know, the NRO has always spent about 95% of its budget in industry, on contract. So we've always been a close partner with industry today, and as new commercial providers are coming in, certainly we're looking at every way to team with them and leverage their capabilities.
I would just add that this is a real intense focus of the Deputy Secretary of Defense, who is leading the reform efforts in the department. Obviously, a big component focused on acquisition, and he is all about leveraging the commercial sector more effectively, and I think that we're going to be seeing a number of reforms in that area.
Okay, these are excellent things. Thank you for the great work that you're doing. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I pause for a little housekeeping that I overlooked at the beginning of the hearing. We have two members of our full committee that are with us today. They're not members of the subcommittee. I'd like to ask unanimous consent that Mr. Moulton of Massachusetts and Ms. Bordayo of Guam sit in on this hearing and be able to participate. Without objection, so ordered. Chair, and I recognize Mr. Norcross from New Jersey.
Thank you, Chairman. General Raymond, for year 19 budget significantly alters. Let me back up one page here. You've had comments that have started from this, how we're trying to get caught up and take advantage, whether it's the private industry and others. The Air Force publicly says they want to move fast and get effective capabilities deployed, which is why Section 1610 of the final NDAA for 18 Conference agrees requires that the United States Air Force operationalize existing best-of-breed commercial space situational capabilities, but not later than May 30th, 2018. What is the plan to operationalize the best-of-breed commercial SSA capabilities by this required deadline?
Yeah,
and this has been ongoing.
Yeah, it has been. In fact, we leverage them pretty heavily today. If you look at the C2 system that we have today called the JSPOC mission system, commercial capabilities are leveraged pretty significantly in that. We also have stood up a capability in Colorado Springs called Catalyst Campus, where we're bringing commercial applications in that commercial companies can test them out there, and then we'll roll them into our ops center to facilitate their integration into our operations. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, in the Enterprise Space Battle Management Command and Control, what we are trying to do is not to have just one company be a winner and then have a whole bunch of losers. We're trying to energize the entire industry by developing open standards and having a consortium-based approach where everybody can play. And that's what we're doing. We'll have a prototype done by 21, and I am eager to harness.
By 21, I'm sorry, did you say?
Prototype by 2021, and I am eager to get all of commercial industry wrapped around those standards. Thank you.
But let me follow up with that. Then General Buck, commander of the Joint Force Command, talked about this and said our capabilities were at a 3. Why are we not doing this quicker, not waiting for everybody to come on board, but take advantage of what we have now and then build up to that?
Yeah, I must not have been clear. We are taking advantage now, and we will continue to take advantage now. This is a future C2 system going forward that we're building the entire system off of that commercial, open standards. But we are leveraging those today, and we'll continue to leverage commercial industry hard as we look to fill some of the gaps that we have.
I'll wait for the closed session when we can get into it a little bit more detail. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heist.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not sure exactly who this question goes to, and I do have some others for our closed session, but just a couple right now. Does the DoD need to be more assertive about blocking potential acquisitions of U.S. companies by China in the space industry and ensuring security here? Okay.
Congressman, that is a key issue. Thank you for raising it. This is an issue that the Secretary and both the Deputy Secretary have raised, looking at supply chain, looking at the implications of foreign ownership or investment in capabilities that are critical or essential to national security. I believe you're familiar with the CFIUS process, in which these types of transactions are assessed by an interagency committee, accessing intelligence and other sources of information to make assessments on the relative risk associated with these transactions. So I think that we are definitely focused within the department on the ways in which adversaries can all too easily acquire capabilities or knowledge that they could use against us. And we're actively involved in that process.
I'm really glad to hear that. So are you saying then that the DoD is responsible or authorized to block these kinds of acquisitions?
The DoD is involved in the interagency process that makes conclusions on transactions that that are concerning and then rise to the CFIUS.
So they have significant influence in the decision.
We're a pretty significant voter in the process.
Great. All right, one other quick question, then I'll defer my other questions. During a red flag event or some other kind of training event, are there services are these services taking into account the possibility of partial loss of our satellite communications?
Absolutely. We embed our space operators into those exercises. The space flag exercise that we also stood up complements that, but we exercise that routinely.
Okay, great. So are any of your offices or all of your offices involved in crafting those type of training exercises?
Sir, that falls under my responsibilities, organized training equipped at Air Force Space Command. We work that routinely.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from Washington State, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to yield my time to Mr. Moulton from Massachusetts.
Gentleman yields to Mr. Moulton, Massachusetts. Chairman from Massachusetts, recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General Raymond, China has successfully conducted test launches of several effective anti-satellite missiles, ostensibly able to destroy U.S. satellites. This development fundamentally alters the strategic balance between great powers, and it's continued to evolve in favor of China, which has accelerated development of space weapons. Public reports indicate China would be able to destroy a staggering number of U.S. satellites in the opening days of a potential conflict, thereby disabling many of the capabilities we've come to rely on in the United States military: GPS, surveillance, targeting, communications, and more. I'll be following up on this in the classified briefing or in a classified setting, but can you just give us an overview of what our strategy is to counter those capabilities? And echoing some of the other questions we've heard from the committee, are we really committing enough resources to this development that could really fundamentally alter the strategic balance? I'd add that, Ms. Sapp talked about the development of AI as one of the things that we're investing in. I mean, China has made a commitment to be the world leader in AI by 2030. You've never heard such a commitment from us. I'm just concerned that we are falling behind, and this is a place where, because of its strategic implications, we clearly have to lead.
Space is a warfighting domain, just like air, land, and sea. And it's become very contested, as you talked about, everything from low-end reversible jamming to the high-end direct ascent ASAT that was demonstrated in 2007, which you highlighted in your question. One of the things that we have a strategy, and really it's a strategy that we share between the NRO and the Department of Defense. We have a vision. We took that vision and we wrapped an operational concept around it called the Space Warfighting Conops. We have trained and exercised for that, and there's several lines of effort that we're doing. Again, if you're responsible for operations in the warfighting domain, you have to have the ability to have domain awareness, SSA. So we're enhancing that in this budget. You have to have the ability to command and control, and so we've invested significantly in our command and control capabilities. You have to have defendable architectures, and in this budget, we've made a significant shift towards having those architectures that we are able to defend. You have to have partnerships, just like we have in all other aspects of joint warfare. We operate with.
If I may interrupt, that all sounds wonderful, but the question really is: are those investments significant enough? Are they significant enough to compete with our great power adversaries who have really stuck their flag in the sand and said this is where we will be in 2020 and 2030?
Right. So my view is that we still have the best space capabilities in the world, operated by the best airmen. We have competitors that are moving very quick, and we need to pick up the pace to stay ahead of that threat. I am comfortable that the $7 billion that we've invested across this FYDP is going to shift and provide us the capabilities that we need to stay ahead of that threat as we continue down the path.
Director Sapp or Assistant Secretary Rapuano, would you like to add to that?
I'll just agree with General Raymond that I think we have not only plans but programs in place to defend against the weapons you're talking about, and I think we could give you some more detail in the classified follow-on. I'd also mention that we've been working automated intelligence, automated target recognition for quite some time, and have made real progress. In fact, it's in operations today.
I think it's well covered by General Raymond and Director Sapp, and just to reiterate, the emphasis is that we are going to be able to prevail in all of those domains critical to our national security and achieving our objectives.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Larson, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll follow up with these questions in a classified setting as well. General Raymond, is my understanding that traditional Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicle, EELV, providers are contracted under Federal Acquisition Regulations, the FAR 15, while new entrants are contracted under FAR 12. It is also my understanding that FAR 12 is a more commercial way of doing business, than FAR-15. Could you explain the difference in procuring launch services using FAR-12 versus FAR-15? And does DoD have the same insight on cost as well as oversight on mission assurance when using both of these contracting methods, or is one more stringent than the other?
Congressman, I'm going to first of all, it's good to see you. I'm going to take that for the record. I'm not an acquisition background guy, and I just don't know the answer to your question, so I'll be happy to take it back and talk to our acquisition professionals to get you an answer.
Okay. Yeah, at the hearing yesterday, General Raymond, about space warfighting readiness, the panelists made it quite clear that our nation's space warfighting construct must adapt to the threats we face today and in the future. It is evident that the Air Force recognizes this. However, the new START program to SBIRS, the next generation overhead persistent infrared, is not clear. As the panelists put it, it is not clear how the alternative is substantially a different approach, unquote, quote, the budget request is not more resilient, unquote, and, quote, disaggregating does not necessarily improve missions or deterrence, unquote. Could you comment on that?
I'll be happy to comment on it. It is more resilient. In fact, the NDA required Stratcom and SSDP to do an assessment of that. They've done that, and I'll be happy to talk to you more in the closed session about it.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Garamendi, for 5 minutes.
I will pass and hopefully get to the classified ASAP.
We have no further Republicans. Who do we have next? Say who? Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Guam, Ms. Bordayo.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for being here today. General Raymond, there's an urgent need to rapidly reconstitute and replenish critical space capabilities to preserve continuity of operations capability. So can you speak to some of the investments in low-cost, responsive launch options that you would recommend the department pursue to fulfill this need?
Yeah, thank you, and it's great to see you again. We have invested in this budget pretty significantly in small launch options. I think it's really important, as you said, for replenishment. We've gone through a period of this before. We did this in the early 90s when we first launched satellites called Iridium, where there's a large constellation of smaller satellites, and there was a lot of companies that were being developed to do the replenishment launches. As you look to new space and constellations that are going to be of significant size, I think it's going to be important, and we've invested that in this budget.
All right, this next question is important to me, and I guess any of you could answer if you could. Today, nearly all U.S. national security satellites are launched from fixed coastal U.S. launch sites that could easily be disrupted. These fixed sites also provide predictable locations from which adversaries could get clues to discern U.S. capabilities. Is the Department of Defense developing more launch sites using new commercial capabilities to address these weaknesses and support a rapid, responsive, and resilient launch capability? I'm a representative from Guam, and I will say here that there has been inquiries about space capabilities in our territory from commercial investors. Very recent were these visits, and they are very ambitious to begin operations. So could any of you comment on this?
Yes, there are commercial launch sites that are available today. We've got them on our fixed bases. We have commercial sites. We also have different spaceports in New Mexico, in Alaska, in Florida, in Virginia. So there are multiple spaceports.
Is Guam on the list, General?
We'd be happy to put Guam on the list, but because I think it's important. I think resiliency is important. I'll tell you one of the big things that has happened over the course of the last year, which is significant, and it doesn't get a lot of press, and that's the move to autonomous flight termination systems and autonomous ranges. So every time. Today, every time SpaceX does a launch, they do it autonomously. So we have to have the ability to protect populations, you have to have the ability to blow up a rocket if it were to go astray. We typically have radars and telemetry dishes and command destruct antennas and a bunch of contractors working that. Today with SpaceX, when they launch, it's all done autonomously. That helps reduce the range infrastructure and make these, in my opinion, a more resilient capability going forward.
Are there any other comments from the other witnesses? Are you aware of the inquiries that have been made to Guam? And they have been to Guam to look at our, of course, our Andersen Air Force Base and the Guam International Airport. So, is anyone aware of that, or is this?
Certainly, the commercial launch providers are going to do their own assessment as to what makes sense for their business, and we're going to use those commercial launch providers. So, we're going to go where they end up.
Well, they were very interested in Andersen Air Force Base, so
it's great.
I just thought maybe. So, I have no further questions, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
General yields back. See no further questions. We will no? Oh, he showed up. Slipped out on me and came back. Chair, and I recognize the gentleman from the great state of Alabama, Mr. Byrne, for any questions he may have.
Mr. Chairman, I did show up. I'm glad you noticed. General, I had to keep you for a few more minutes, but my questions really pertain to personnel. And a lot of times we talk about space, we like to get talking about the technological stuff, but it's the people, as you know better than I do, that matter. Do you think you have the proper number of service members to do this? Do you believe you're efficiently manned to shift from a peacetime operational tempo to a warfighting one? And are we effectively utilizing the skills of these service members to capitalize on their talents?
First of all, let me thank you for the question. And it gives me a chance to brag on the airmen that I'm privileged to lead. We've got the world's finest airmen, and they're doing spectacular work for our nation and our joint force. The Air Force has more mission than it does resources, and so as part of that larger issue, looking forward to a contested environment, I do think there's room for growth. In fact, the Secretary of the Air Force and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force have tasked me to conduct a study, which we're doing as we speak, to look at the structure, the size, the scope, the scale, the professional development aspects of those airmen, and I'll report back to them this summer.
Good. And do you think that you can shift with your present number from a peacetime scenario to a wartime scenario? Would you have to have an increase to do that?
We operate 24/7, 365. It's global operations all the time. I'm very comfortable that I've got the capabilities that I need today.
And you know, you would be unusual if you weren't like everything else in the private sector or in the public sector, and that is the rapidly changing need for skills development because technology is moving so fast. Do you feel like you've got the resources you need to continually provide the skills training these folks need?
I do, and as I mentioned, one of my big priorities for the command is professional development and developing operators to be able to operate in this contested environment. We have completely transformed how we train our operators. In this budget, we again have invested in I think you might have been out at $175 million in training infrastructure to be able to get after the challenges that we currently face.
Well, I'm a strong supporter of what you're doing. I ran the workforce training system in Alabama, and you know what we're doing in Huntsville and at Maxwell Air Force Base. And, you know, keeping the civilian folks coming into that was a part of my portfolio. And I was amazed at how rapidly things were moving. And I just know that you've got that on steroids. And I just want to express my support for what you're doing. And if you think you need more resources or help from us, please let us know.
I really appreciate your support.
Yes,
thank you.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We will now go into recess and reconvene in the SCIF in about 10 minutes.